It's like we're re-experiencing or reliving it. We're not just remembering what happened, but we're stimulated to relive parts of that, whether it's a smell, whether it's the sound, whether it's the heat on your body, for example. And so before reprocessing, we have those negative effects. I'm reliving what happened. And after EMDR reprocessing, that doesn't happen anymore.
Welcome to the First Responder Families podcast, sponsored by Shadowproof at FHE Health, a nationally recognized behavioral health provider. I am your host, Ivana Bada, a director of family services at FHE Health and a family, couples, and trauma therapist. Join me for meaningful conversations and talks that support wellness and mental health of first responders and their families.
Welcome back, first responder families. We have today an expert conversation with an amazing person who will talk to us about EMDR therapy. Hello, Annalee.
Good morning, Ivana.
I would like to introduce you to our audience so they can stay tuned in for this wonderful conversation. Annalee Moody is a licensed psychotherapist. She is EMDR trained. She is a retired EMT medic, also retired Army personnel, and amazing, interesting, fun human being, always evolving. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm just so pleased to be here with you. I appreciate you so much and just very happy to be here together today.
In case you are wondering, and you still don't have it in your memory, EMDR what? So I'm going to ask you, Annalee. You may still get it from lay folks who are not therapist counselors, and of course many people are not. What is this EMDR?
Yes, I think that's an important thing to do is just let's get rid of all the mystery and let's cut to the chase and just sort of define it for people so that everybody knows what it is and what we're doing and what we're talking about. So EMDR therapy, it's a type of psychotherapy and it stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy. And so that's a mouthful. That's why we use the acronym EMDR. And what we're doing with EMDR therapy is memory reconsolidation. And that is sort of reconciling the data that's been stored in the brain in a problematic way, especially for trauma and people that have experienced trauma and had exposures that are exposures that are trauma. It helps them re-experience that and it helps them deal with that in a much better way.
Yeah. So, and that makes me to wonder, for you personally, when did EMDR catch your attention, your ear, your eye? Do you remember the moment? Because now it's a love affair for you,
Sure. Yes. I think, how I first came to know about EMDR was as a client. As a former paramedic, I've had a lot of therapy myself. And so, the thing that helped me the most was EMDR therapy. And so once I got way better with my own mental health and went back to school and became a counselor, I just had a calling to get skilled at the thing that helped me the most, which was EMDR.
Yeah. And that's so powerful, a lived experience.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. So I'm always looking at it through the lens of the client first, because I had EMDR as a client first before I was even a counselor. And so the ways in which it helped me was, beyond my ability to describe it in language. And so that's why I really felt this drive to learn everything I could about it. What is it? How does it work? What's the mechanism of action in the brain? And what can we do with it to help people?
Yeah. How does that work? Again, in a simple language, there might be spouses or adult children or first responders themselves who are wondering, how does that work? It's one of the few very surprising therapies, since Freudian times.
Right. Yeah, it's newer, meaning we've had EMDR a little over 30 years. So not brand new, but that's new in therapy world. And so it's become more developed and evolved over the 30-ish years, a little over 30 years that we've had EMDR therapy. But in a nutshell, how it works is EMDR therapy uses bilateral nervous system stimulation. Okay. There are different ways to do that depending on the therapist. They can choose which type of stimulation they use, but they apply stimulation bilaterally, which just means on each side of the body, in order to start the data processing engine of the brain. And the purpose behind that is the way the brain stores and encodes data that comes in during a traumatic experience. Data meaning the sights, the sounds, the smells, the feelings. The way the brain deals with that data is problematic, and it kind of gets stuck to where it's not just a memory anymore. We can be triggered to relive that or re-experience it at any time. And so we turn on the processing engine of the brain in order to reconsolidate or process out that data and move the data from where it's been stuck to where it's stored in your regular memory files that we don't relive or can't re-experience, so that stops happening.
Yeah. So what I hear is, again, just for our listeners to get the picture, E for eye.
Yes.
It can be eye movements, but other bilateral.
Right.
M for movement. So there is something moving.
Yes.
And not only externally, but also internally.
Right.
And what about reprocessing?
Yes. Desensitization and reprocessing. Exactly. That's what we're dealing with. The experience of the memory changes. Okay. So a traumatic memory that's bothering you or affecting you negatively, like I said before, it's like we're re-experiencing or reliving it. We're not just remembering what happened, but we're stimulated to relive parts of that, whether it's a smell, whether it's the sound, whether it's the heat on your body, for example. And so before reprocessing, we have those negative effects. I'm reliving what happened. And after EMDR reprocessing, that doesn't happen anymore. I have the memory, the knowledge and memory of what happened stays intact. But I'm not re-experiencing any of those sensory re-experiences with the sights, the sounds, the smells. That doesn't happen anymore. So it gets put where it belongs, in your fully, in the past memory files of the hippocampus of the brain.
Oh, yeah. So there's science behind it. Mr. Busted.
Right. When it was developed over 30 years ago, they didn't know the mechanism of action. They didn't know how it worked exactly. What they knew was what they were seeing clinically and what patients were reporting, that this was dramatically helpful. But thankfully, they've studied that and they've used brain imaging studies. And so now we know exactly how it works. And so we can talk about that confidently today.
From your experience, Annalee, not only as a clinician, but also as the first responders, what are some of the common, kind of maybe even basic symptoms that the person experiences behaviorally, but also internally, that they may be good candidates for EMDR therapy?
Sure. I think, most first responders and veterans, most people in general are good candidates for EMDR therapy. Mm-hmm. And, what we're looking at in terms of treating trauma and traumatic exposures is, if you've been exposed to something, or if you've had an experience that is sticking with you, right? Mm-hmm. That is coming up in your mind, if you're thinking about it a lot, if you have images that come to mind from that experiences that kind of stick with you or come back over and over and over again, if you're having irritability, if you're having trouble sleeping, if you're having, lots and lots of conflict in your interpersonal relationships, if you're having lots of anxiety, up to and including panic type symptoms, increased depression, increased desire to isolate yourself away from others and be alone all the time. Those can just be some sort of general markers that you should think about some type of therapy, but also that EMDR therapy might be helpful for you.
You know, one family member shared with me that in first responders culture, you know, if they use like in their community, if they use like dentists, that they all go to dentists, they all go to same doctor.
Yeah.
That makes me feel like EMDR could be as a go-to therapy. What do you think?
Yeah, the population's very loyal, right? And they rely on each other to sort of vet providers of all types. And either this provider knows how to work with us or they don't. And that becomes a very common shared knowledge in our population. And so, but I do think, you know, there are some unique things that's true, but there are also some unique things about EMDR therapy itself that make it particularly useful and helpful, that it works very well with first responders, right? One of those things is, as opposed to traditional talk therapy, first responders and talk therapy have had an, let's just say, adversive relationship, historically, because first responders, we don't want to talk very much about what we've been through, right? We don't want to talk about what we saw, during the shift during the day. We don't want to bring that home. And, traditional talk therapy can present a barrier in that way, is that we don't want to talk about what we got exposed to and we don't know how to talk about it. And so the thing that's really awesome about EMDR therapy is it's not talk therapy, and we're not using talking as the as the treatment modality, right? We're talking very little about what we're working on, which might sound strange, and the expectation of coming to a therapy session might be different when you come to an EMDR session, because again, we're not going to talk very much about what you've been through. We're going to process it with EMDR. So that makes it very attractive to first responders and veterans too, actually. But also how quickly it works. That makes it very attractive too, because most first responders who are, actively on the job, need to get back up to speed. They need to get symptoms mitigated and resolved so that they can go back to work and re-engage with their life without being affected by these things anymore. So that they can feel like they're back online, they're ready, they're fully functional, and they're not having some kind of a deficit or some kind of a negative effect anymore. So for those two reasons, because we're not having to talk about our feelings or the experiences very much, and because it works so quickly.
That's huge benefits.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You are also a program developer, in terms of the EMDR intensives. Yes. Can you share with the audience what would be the difference between intensive EMDR and maybe 15 minutes or 45 minutes EMDR sessions?
Sure. EMDR, the tool of EMDR therapy, is the same tool, right? But there are different applications of that tool, different uses of it, and different ways to apply it. And so traditional weekly EMDR therapy versus intensive EMDR, there are some differences. And intensive EMDR therapy, it's consolidated, right? So therefore it tends to be more effective more quickly. They're both as effective as one another overall. Intensive EMDR just is as effective in a shorter amount of time. You're having longer sessions, longer sets, and sometimes more stimulus applied for a longer period of time. It's more condensed versus going to weekly EMDR once a week for an hour every week for a long period of time.
Yeah. And the word that comes to me is like there's some space and time for integration.
Right. Yeah. Intensive EMDR is very efficient. Right. When you're talking about going to a therapy session once a week, you have to spend time opening the session. How are you? How have things been this week? So to those of us that do intensives frequently or almost exclusively, that can start to feel like wasted therapy time right? It's important in a weekly traditional therapy role to sort of gauge how your client's doing and those sorts of things. But if you're working together for several hours to reprocess a target with EMDR, you don't have to come back time and time again, open and close the session. And so there's an efficiency factor there.
Our audience may be curious about success story or any situation that you can recall that the EMDR helped to resolve something that maybe for years was stuck?
Yes.
So many, right?
Yes. That's hard to come up with just on the top of my head because it's so common. It's so common that I hear once a day. I've been struggling with this for 30 years.
Wow.
And now it doesn't bother me anymore. I hear that at least once a day, right? 30 years, 20 years, 6 months, 47 years. I've been carrying this around with me and it feels like I put it down. I feel lighter. I feel relieved. I feel like the shadow is not hanging over me anymore. I hear that on repeat over and over and over again because it is so effective. Yeah. So I would say I would hesitate to bring up one success story because there are so many. Because it's highly effective. I think one of the common things that I see with clients when they talk to their families, when they come back for their second session and we're asking, how are you? What are you noticing with the stuff we worked on last week with the target? And once it's become resolved, one of the things that they frequently tell me is, now I'm able to talk about this with my family. This thing that I've kept secret for my whole life, or this thing that I was too ashamed to share since it happened 2 years ago on the job, whatever the case may be. That's the most common thing I hear is now I'm able to share this experience with my wife, with my family, and without issue. And I feel like they can understand me better. I feel like I can be more honest and, transparent with them. And I can let some of those walls down and let them in a little closer because it's comfortable for me to do that now. I don't feel, negative about it. The shame is gone. So the guilt is gone. The fear is gone. The anger has been resolved. So those are the most common things I hear.
Speaking about family members, right? Knowing that they also develop this walking on eggshells around unresolved trauma,
right,
or vicarious trauma around first responders. How would they benefit from EMDR if they are looking or seeking for some kind of therapist, and of course they maybe want to talk, but how could EMDR help them?
Absolutely. Great question. I think, we're using EMDR for all kinds of things in the therapy world. Okay. There are EMDR protocols for performance enhancement, like for sports and athletes, right? There are EMDR protocols specific for addiction. There are EMDR protocols for anxiety and, OCD, if you have that as an issue. But the family members, I just want you to know EMDR therapy, is becoming a treatment for lots of different varied issues, right? So anxiety, depression. So if you're having any of those yourself, therapy is good. Family therapy is good. Couples therapy, of course, but EMDR therapy to pair with any other kind of therapy modality you might be seeking out is a really good option.
Yeah, the effectiveness is present for any kind of symptoms.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. Always get so inspired when you talk about EMDR. Yeah, making it more public and more understandable for our audience that are not working or living in the therapy world.
Right. Absolutely. In particular for individuals who've had traumatic exposures or traumatic experiences, whether you're a first responder or veteran or not.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
If you've had, experiences that are, challenging, we want you to know about the tool of EMDR therapy. You know, we want you to know what it is and how it works, and that it's out there, and that it's user friendly, and that it works.
And I think we are really talking about EMDR in the right time, as it is gaining its popularity. It's more in media, newsletters, lawyers talk about it, even celebrities. Have you heard anything?
I have actually. You know, we've had the tool of EMDR for a long time, but it's recently become widely talked about. And there are some stars. The ones that I've heard about are Miley Cyrus, Prince Harry, Sandra Bullock, and they've become pretty big proponents of EMDR therapy and talking about their own personal experiences having EMDR therapy and what it's like and how it's helped them. So, you know, I encourage people to seek some of that information out too, if that would help you become more willing to try it and to get familiar with what it is.
As we are coming to the close of our conversation, I'm still thinking about if you know of or you would like to offer some resources, because the tool of EMDR is based on therapy and being with the therapist. But those who have gone already through EMDR, like our clients have, then they may still continue in resourcing themselves so they can maintain good, restore mental health. And of course, in case that they experience some new trauma or critical incident, they can go back to EMDR therapy.
Right.
But what about maintenance and reset of the nervous system after a long day and hard day at work?
For sure. So I think I'm hearing a two-part question. One part is resources for people for maintenance and for ongoing EMDR therapy once they get out of treatment. So I want to address that first. We're happy to help them get connected up with, you know, EMDR therapists and how to find EMDR therapists in their area. And one of the most basic user-friendly tools is a mental health provider search engine, psychologytoday.com. And that's a provider search engine. And you just put it in the search bar, and it allows you to put in your zip code, and then there are filters. So you can filter by therapist type and your insurance type, for example. So if you wanted to find an EMDR therapist that takes your insurance within your zip code, you can just plug it in there. So that's a really good resource, and not just for EMDR, for all kinds of therapists and therapy. And it brings up the therapist bio and, you know, some information about them so that you can start to narrow down the search and to see what's in your area. And for first responders and veterans, I'm always encouraging them to kind of vet their providers, especially EMDR providers. We want them to have some experience with providing EMDR, whether it's with first responders or not. We want them to be experienced so that they can, manage the presentation of a large amount of trauma that this population experiences.
And if the person doesn't have necessarily EMDR therapists, what are some of the resources that could help them to just manage nervous system on a daily basis?
Right. So I think, part of EMDR therapy, as we talked about in the beginning of our conversation today, was that bilateral nervous system stimulation. And you can use that for nervous system regulation too. Yeah. Meaning if I'm really anxious, I can use some bilateral stimulation in the form of tapping, like this, right? So there are some ways to learn about bilateral stimulation to use as regulation tools or as coping tools that are free and available online, of course. That's separate from EMDR therapy, right? Yeah. It's using bilateral stimulus to regulate challenging emotions, or activation is what we call it as therapists. And when we say activation, we mean anxiety is a type of activation. Anger is a type of activation. So just to regulate that, you can use the stimulation for that.
I will definitely will try it, and I'll put it into library of my resources. Yes. Yeah, that's a really great reminder, perhaps even for our listeners.
Sure. Yeah, and I think, you want to start with something guided, whether it's a free guided, grounding session on even YouTube or something like that. You just don't want to be out there, on your own, because that can lead to frustration, and it can make you feel like I can't do this, or I don't know what I'm doing, or it didn't help. So guided, even if you're not going to a traditional therapist, using some guided, whether it's a meditation, whether it's using the bilateral stimulation, something like that at first, till you sort of get the hang of it, you figure out what works for you best, and then can be extremely helpful.
What is helping you to maintain a good mental health?
Right. Well, that's a very good question, because we have to practice what we preach. We have to model, taking care of ourselves if we expect to be well enough to continue doing our jobs, right? But also to live that, practice of how to balance our responsibilities, our trauma, exposures, our stress with our everyday lives, and, do the best we can. So, I think for me, just I try to maintain a balance with, for me personally, I value some alone time, some decompression, moving my body, taking walks. And I really enjoy spending time with my dog. We know animals help regulate us significantly. So those are at the top of my list.
And as we are landing here together, thank you so much, Annalee, for sharing your expertise, but also really your passion and your craft with us. And for the listeners, I hope that we inspired you, enough to look it up and see how you could apply this in your own self-care and healing. Thank you for listening. Until next time.
Thank you for tuning in. The First Responder Families podcast is sponsored by Shadowproof at FHE Health, a specialized treatment program for first responders with mental health and/or substance use issues. For more information about our show and our services, check out FHEHealth.com. The podcast website also has a place where you can share your ideas or questions for future shows. If you are struggling, we want to help. Feel free to call us at 844-714-3403 or visit FHEHealth.com. We look forward to having you join us for our podcast next month. Until then, take care.